The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere over the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. What followed was a transmission that would be analyzed, debated, and ultimately classified for the next 15 years. Ghost Rider, this is Neptune 6. We have a problem. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reaper Valdez, leader of a 12-man SEAL team that had been inserted 72 hours earlier into what intelligence had assured them was a low-threat reconnaissance mission. Now, pinned down on a rocky outcropping designated Hill 2847, with enemy forces closing from 3 directions, Valdez was learning the hard way that intelligence could be catastrophically wrong. Above the chaos, circling at 18,000 feet in an AC-130U spooky gunship, Captain Lydia Mongoose Castellanos pressed her headset closer to her ear. The 29-year-old pilot had been flying combat missions for 6 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the usual chatter from command had gone eerily quiet. No close air support requests were being approved. No backup was coming. According to the brass, air power in this sector was unavailable due to operational constraints. What they didn't tell the SEALs bleeding out below was that 3 hours earlier, a surface-to-air missile battery had been detected in the region. Standard protocol demanded all aircraft maintain a 50-kilometer buffer zone. The risk was too great, the potential losses too significant. Better to extract the team via alternate means than lose a $100 million aircraft and its crew. But Castellanos had heard something in Valdez's voice that made her stomach clench. It wasn't fear. SEALs didn't do fear. It was resignation. The kind of quiet acceptance that came when a warrior realized he was about to die, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. She glanced at her co-pilot, Major James "Whiskey" Morrison, whose weathered face remained focused on the instruments. Behind them, Senior Airman Rodriguez manned the sensors, while Technical Sergeant Kim operated the weapon systems. They all heard the same transmission. They all understood what it meant. The AC-130U banked slowly in the darkness, its 4 turboprop engines maintaining their steady drone. Below, muzzle flashes lit up the mountainside like deadly fireflies. 12 Americans were about to die, and air power, the very thing that had kept ground troops alive for decades, had been declared unavailable. Castellanos reached for her radio selector switch, knowing that what she was about to do would either save lives or end her career. The mission briefing had been routine. Intelligence indicated minimal enemy presence in the target area. The SEALs would conduct reconnaissance, gather signals intelligence, and extract via helicopter after 48 hours. Simple, clean, low risk. But 48 hours had stretched into 72, and the helicopter extraction had been compromised when enemy forces appeared in numbers that defied every intelligence estimate. What should have been a company-sized force turned out to be nearly battalion strength, complete with heavy weapons and sophisticated communications equipment. Ghost Rider, be advised we are Winchester on most munitions. Valdez's voice came through again, using the military term for running out of ammunition. Request immediate close air support, over. The response from the Tactical Operations Center was swift and final. Neptune 6, negative on close air support. Maintain position and prepare for alternate extraction. But there was no alternate extraction. The nearest friendly forces were 6 hours away by ground, and the helicopter assets had been grounded due to the same surface-to-air missile threat that was keeping the fixed-wing aircraft at bay. Castellanos felt the familiar weight of her flight suit against her shoulders as she adjusted her position in the pilot's seat. The AC-130U was a formidable weapons platform, a flying artillery battery capable of devastating precision strikes. Its 25 Gatling gun could fire 1,800 rounds per minute. The 40 Bofors cannon could punch through armored vehicles, and the 105 howitzer could level buildings. But firepower meant nothing if you weren't allowed to use it. She looked down at the tactical display showing Hill 2847. 12 green dots represented the SEAL team, now compressed into a defensive position roughly 30 meters across. Red dots, enemy forces, surrounded them in a tightening noose. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Time was running out. Morrison caught her eye and shook his head slightly. He knew what she was thinking, and he knew it was career suicide. Disobeying a direct order to maintain safe distance wasn't just insubordination, it was potentially sacrificing a crew of 12 to save a team of 12. The brass would call it an unacceptable risk. But the brass weren't listening to the voices on the radio. The AC-130U continued its lazy orbit, a predator denied its prey by bureaucracy and risk assessment matrices that reduced human lives to acceptable loss statistics. Somewhere below, 12 warriors were making their final preparations, checking their remaining ammunition, and probably thinking about home. In the cargo hold of the aircraft, Technical Sergeant Kim stared at his weapons control panel. Every system showed green, ready, capable, waiting for permission that would never come. The night sky over Afghanistan was clear, stars visible despite the aircraft's position lights. In a few hours, dawn would break over the mountains, and if the SEALs were still alive, they would face an enemy that had spent the night moving into final assault positions. Castellanos made her decision. "Crew, this is Pilot," she announced over the intercom, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose. "I'm going to ask each of you to make a choice tonight. We can follow orders and watch 12 Americans die, or we can do what we trained to do." The response was immediate. Morrison's hand moved to his flight controls without a word. Behind them, Rodriguez began adjusting sensor parameters. Kim's fingers danced across his weapons panel, bringing systems online that had been waiting in standby mode. No one spoke about careers or court-martials. No one mentioned the surface-to-air missile threat or the potential consequences of disobeying direct orders. They were professional warriors, and warriors didn't abandon their own. "Neptune 6, this is Ghost Rider," Castellanos transmitted, her voice cutting through the static. "We're coming to get you." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Valdez's voice came back, thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "Ghost Rider negative. You are ordered to maintain safe distance. We understand the situation." "Neptune 6, Ghost Rider. Orders are made to be broken. Mark your position with strobes and get your heads down. We're inbound hot." The AC-130U began its descent from 18,000 feet to 8,000, still above most small arms fire, but well within range of the surface-to-air missiles that had grounded every other aircraft in the region. The decision was made, and there was no going back. As the aircraft descended through the thin mountain air, Castellanos thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. 6 years earlier, she had been Captain Nobody, a transport pilot ferrying supplies between forward operating bases. The kind of assignment given to pilots who were competent but not exceptional, reliable but not remarkable. Her call sign Mongoose had started as an insult. During her first month in country, she had lost her temper during a briefing, snapping at a colonel who had dismissed her concerns about aircraft maintenance. "That little pilot's got some bite," someone had joked, "like a mongoose." The name stuck, but not as a compliment. It took 2 years and dozens of combat missions before anyone realized that Mongoose Castellanos had developed an uncanny ability to find trouble and eliminate it. She flew low, slow, and deadly, characteristics that made other pilots nervous but kept ground troops alive. Her transition to the AC-130 program had been reluctant on both sides. The gunship community was traditionally male, traditionally closed to outsiders, and traditionally skeptical of pilots who hadn't earned their spurs in fighters or bombers. But the community needed experienced pilots, and Castellanos needed a platform where her particular skills could make a difference. Now, descending toward Hill 2847 with her career and possibly her life on the line, she was about to prove exactly what kind of difference she could make. The first surface-to-air missile launched at 3:54 hours, its contrail visible as a white streak against the star-filled sky. Castellanos saw it on her threat warning system before she saw it visually. A SA-14 shoulder-fired missile with just enough range and altitude capability to be dangerous. "Flares, flares, flares," Morrison called out, his hands working the countermeasures system. Hot magnesium flares bloomed in the AC-130's wake, creating false heat signatures designed to confuse the missile's infrared seeker. The missile took the bait, detonating harmlessly 200 meters behind the aircraft. But the launch had revealed the enemy's position, and more importantly, it had revealed their capability. SA-14s were sophisticated weapons, not the kind of equipment typically found with irregular forces. "Ghost Rider Neptune 6, Valdez's voice crackled through the radio. "Confirm you are taking SAM fire. Abort mission, repeat, abort mission." But Castellanos was already bringing the AC-130 into its firing orbit, a left-hand turn that would allow the weapons on the port side of the aircraft to engage targets below. At 8,000 feet, the gunship was a stable firing platform, its sensors capable of distinguishing between friend and foe with deadly precision. "Neptune 6, Ghost Rider, we see your strobes. Identify enemy positions with laser designator if able." The SEAL team's laser designator painted targets with invisible infrared light, visible only to the AC-130 sensors. The first target was a heavy machine gun position dug into the rocks 50 meters north of the SEAL position. "Target acquired," Technical Sergeant Kim announced. "Request clearance to engage." Castellanos looked down at the tactical display one more time. 12 green dots surrounded by red. The mathematics hadn't changed, but the equation was about to be rebalanced. "Cleared hot." The 25 Gatling gun opened fire at 3:56 hours, its distinctive buzzsaw sound echoing off the mountain peaks. 1,800 rounds per minute transformed the machine gun position into smoking rubble in less than 10 seconds. The enemy's return fire slackened immediately. But the SA-14 crews were repositioning, and Castellanos knew they had maybe minutes before more missiles started flying. The AC-130's infrared signature was massive, 4 hot turboprop engines, and the heat from its weapons systems made it a target that no missile could miss if it got close enough. "Target 2, bearing 270 from friendly position," Rodriguez called out, identifying another enemy strongpoint through the aircraft's sensors. The 40 Bofors cannon engaged, its shells walking up the mountainside with devastating accuracy. Each round contained enough explosive power to kill or wound anyone within a 15-meter radius. The enemy forces, who had spent 3 days methodically closing in on the trapped SEALs, suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of precision fire from an aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist. "Beautiful shooting, Ghost Rider," Valdez transmitted, his voice carrying the first note of hope it had held in hours. "Enemy forces are repositioning. Looks like they're trying to withdraw to the north." But Castellanos knew better than to let a retreating enemy escape. Troops who withdrew today would return tomorrow, better prepared and more dangerous. The mission wasn't just about saving the SEALs, it was about eliminating the threat permanently. "Neptune 6, can you identify any command and control positions? We need to take out their leadership." The laser designator moved, painting a position roughly 200 meters uphill from the original enemy positions. "Ghost Rider, possible command post at laser designation. Be advised, we're seeing technical vehicles moving in from the west." Technical vehicles, pickup trucks mounted with heavy weapons, were the enemy's mobile reserve. If they reached the battle area, the tactical situation would become significantly more complex. "Roger Neptune 6, We'll handle the technicals. Kim, bring the 105 online. The 105 howitzer was the AC-130's most powerful weapon, capable of destroying armored vehicles with a single shot. It was also the most difficult to employ accurately, requiring precise coordination between pilot, navigator, and weapons operator. Technical Sergeant Kim's voice was calm and professional as he prepared the big gun. 105 ready, target acquired, range 4,000 meters. The howitzer fired once, its recoil causing the entire aircraft to shudder. 4 seconds later, a technical vehicle disappeared in a flash of orange flame, its explosion visible even from 8,000 feet. Direct hit, Rodriguez confirmed. Remaining vehicles are scattering. But the enemy's response was immediate and deadly. 3 more SA-14 missiles launched simultaneously from different positions, their contrails converging on the AC-130's position like deadly fingers reaching up from the earth. Morrison worked the countermeasures frantically, dispensing flares and chaff while Castellanos threw the aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver. The AC-130 wasn't built for aerobatics. It was a cargo plane converted into a weapons platform, stable and steady rather than agile and maneuverable. 2 missiles missed, confused by the countermeasures and the aircraft's sudden change in direction. The 3rd missile detonated close enough to pepper the aircraft's tail section with shrapnel, causing several warning lights to illuminate on the flight engineer's panel. Damage report, Castellanos called out, fighting to maintain control as the aircraft shuddered from the near miss. Flight controls responding normally, Morrison reported. We've got some holes in the tail, but nothing critical. Below them, the battlefield had changed. The enemy forces, no longer confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage, were beginning a fighting withdrawal. But they weren't running. They were repositioning for a more coordinated assault. Ghost Rider, Neptune 6, Valdez's voice carried a new urgency. Be advised, we're picking up radio chatter indicating enemy reinforcements inbound from multiple directions. Estimate company strength force arriving within 30 minutes. A company strength force meant another 150 to 200 enemy fighters. Even with the AC-130's firepower, those odds were problematic. The aircraft carried a finite amount of ammunition, and they had already expended nearly 20% of their load. But abandoning the SEALs now would mean certain death for the ground team. The original enemy force had been bloodied but not broken, and fresh reinforcements would finish what the first group had started. Castellanos made another command decision that would either save lives or get everyone killed. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider, we're going to need you to do something that goes against everything you've been taught. When I give the word, I need your team to illuminate every enemy position you can see with whatever you've got, laser designators, flashlights, anything that marks targets. There was a pause before Valdez responded. Ghost Rider, that will compromise our position and draw fire. Neptune 6, I'm aware. But if we're going to break this up before reinforcements arrive, I need to see every target simultaneously. This is going to be danger close. I'm talking about rounds impacting within 50 meters of your position. Danger close was military terminology for fire support delivered within the blast radius of friendly forces. It was inherently risky, requiring absolute trust between ground troops and air support. A miscalculation of 50 meters could kill the people you were trying to save. Ghost Rider, Neptune 6 copies danger close fire mission. We trust you. Those 4 words, we trust you, carried more weight than any medal or commendation Castellanos had ever received. Trust was the currency that mattered in combat, and the SEALs had just handed her their lives. The AC-130 came around in a tight orbit, all weapon systems synchronized for a coordinated strike. Kim had switched to computer-assisted targeting, allowing the aircraft's sensors to identify and prioritize multiple targets simultaneously. All stations, Ghost Rider, Castellanos transmitted. Weapons free. Engage all designated targets. What followed was 90 seconds of sustained fire that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. The 25 Gatling gun, 40 Bofors cannon, and 105 howitzer fired in sequence, walking destruction across the mountainside with surgical precision. Enemy positions that had taken hours to construct were obliterated in seconds. The carefully coordinated assault dissolved into chaos as fighters who had been confident in their numerical advantage suddenly found themselves on the wrong end of overwhelming firepower. But the enemy's reinforcements were arriving, and Castellanos could see vehicle lights moving up the mountain roads from 3 different directions. The tactical situation was about to become exponentially more complicated. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider, we've got company coming. What's your extraction plan? Valdez's response was immediate. Ghost Rider, there is no extraction plan. We're supposed to hold position until friendly ground forces arrive, but that's 6 hours minimum. 6 hours was a lifetime in a firefight, especially with enemy reinforcements streaming toward the battle area. The AC-130 would be low on ammunition long before then, and once the aircraft departed, the SEALs would be back where they started, outnumbered and outgunned. Unless someone came up with a better plan. Castellanos studied her navigation display, looking for alternatives that didn't exist in any official tactical manual. The nearest friendly outpost was Forward Operating Base Chapman, 40 kilometers to the east. Too far for the SEALs to reach on foot, especially while under fire. But there was another option, a landing zone that had been abandoned 2 years earlier when coalition forces had consolidated their positions. Landing Zone Viper was only 12 kilometers from Hill 2847, well within range for a SEAL team to reach if they had covering fire. The problem was that Landing Zone Viper was in a valley surrounded by high ground, the kind of terrain that made helicopters vulnerable to small arms fire. It was also supposed to be cleared of enemy presence, but intelligence had been wrong about everything else tonight. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider, how do you feel about a cross-country hike? Ghost Rider, we're rangers. We were born for cross-country hikes. Actually, they were SEALs, not rangers, but Castellanos understood the sentiment. Special Operations Forces didn't do easy. Neptune 6, I'm going to give you a route to Landing Zone Viper. 12 kilometers, mostly downhill, but you'll be moving through potentially hostile territory. I can provide overwatch for the first part of the route, but after that you're on your own until extraction birds can reach the LZ. There was a brief pause while Valdez conferred with his team. When he came back on the radio, his voice carried the kind of confidence that only came from warriors who had survived the impossible before. Ghost Rider Neptune 6 will take that hike. Request you clear the route ahead of us. Castellanos smiled grimly. Clearing the route was exactly what the AC-130 did best. The fighting withdrawal began at 4:28 hours, with the SEAL team moving in tactical formation, while the AC-130 provided continuous overhead cover. It was a dangerous ballet, with ground forces and air support coordinating through nothing more than radio communications and mutual trust. The enemy reinforcements had arrived, but their commanders were having second thoughts about pressing an attack against an enemy supported by an AC-130 gunship. The initial assault force had been decimated, and the burning vehicles scattered across the mountainside served as a graphic reminder of what happened when you fought American air power. But some of the enemy fighters were more determined than others. As the SEALs began their movement toward Landing Zone Viper, small groups of enemy forces attempted to intercept them, using the terrain to mask their approach from the circling aircraft. Contact front, Valdez transmitted, his voice calm despite the circumstances. Enemy squad approximately 200 meters ahead dug in along the ridgeline. Castellanos could see the muzzle flashes through the AC-130 sensors, but the enemy position was close enough to the SEAL team that engaging with the aircraft's weapons would put friendly forces at risk. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider, that position is too close for us to engage safely. Can you bypass? Negative, Ghost Rider. Terrain forces us through a choke point. We're going to have to go through them. Going through a prepared enemy position was exactly the kind of frontal assault that got people killed. But the SEALs had limited ammunition and no time for elaborate flanking maneuvers. They needed immediate, precise fire support, and they needed it danger close. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider. Mark your exact position and stand by for immediate suppression. Technical Sergeant Kim switched to the 25 Gatling gun, the most precise of the AC-130's weapon systems. At this range, with computer-assisted targeting, he could place rounds within 5 meters of designated coordinates. Rounds outgoing, Kim announced, his finger steady on the trigger. The Gatling gun fired in controlled bursts, each burst lasting exactly 2 seconds and placing 30 rounds on target. The enemy position vanished in a cloud of dust and flying rock fragments, the defenders either killed or forced to take cover in whatever shelter they could find. Ghost Rider Neptune 6. Outstanding shooting. Area is clear, continuing movement. But Castellanos knew that their luck couldn't hold forever. The AC-130 was down to 60% of its ammunition load, and they hadn't even reached the halfway point of the route to landing zone Viper. More concerning, the aircraft's fuel state was becoming a factor. Even with external fuel tanks, the gunship couldn't orbit indefinitely. The enemy seemed to understand this as well. Rather than mounting direct attacks, they were positioning forces along the SEAL team's route of march, forcing the aircraft to expend ammunition on each defensive position. It was a war of attrition, and the mathematics were not in favor of the Americans. Ghost Rider, Neptune 6. We've got movement in the valley below. Looks like they're trying to get ahead of us and set up blocking positions. Castellanos could see the enemy movement through her sensors. Roughly 30 fighters moving rapidly through terrain that would allow them to interdict the SEAL team's route to the landing zone. This was the moment when tactical decisions became strategic ones. Engaging the enemy forces in the valley would require significant ammunition expenditure, possibly leaving the aircraft unable to provide support for the remainder of the SEAL team's movement. But allowing those forces to establish blocking positions would almost certainly result in the SEAL team being trapped and destroyed. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider. We're going to clear that valley. When we do, I need your team to move fast. We may not have enough ammunition left to provide continuous cover for the entire route. Ghost Rider Neptune 6 copies. We'll be ready to run. The attack on the valley position was the most complex fire mission of Castellanos' career. The enemy forces were spread across a wide area, using natural cover and concealment to minimize their exposure to air attack. Engaging them effectively would require all 3 of the AC-130's weapon systems firing in carefully coordinated sequence. All weapons, multiple targets, grid coordinates as follows. Technical Sergeant Kim read off a string of numbers that would determine whether 12 SEALs lived or died. The 105 howitzer fired first, its high-explosive shell creating a massive blast that scattered the enemy forces and destroyed their heavy weapons. The 40 cannon followed, engaging targets that were attempting to reposition. Finally, the 25 Gatling gun walked fire across the valley floor, forcing any survivors to take cover or flee. The valley fell silent within minutes, but the cost had been enormous. The AC-130 was now down to 30% of its ammunition load, and they still had 6 kilometers of potentially hostile territory to cover. Neptune 6 Ghost Rider, valley is clear, move now. The SEAL team's movement through the cleared valley was the fastest they had moved all night, covering 3 kilometers in less than an hour. But their improved pace came at the cost of noise discipline, and the enemy forces throughout the region were beginning to converge on their position. By 5:45 hours, dawn was beginning to break over the mountains, and the tactical situation was changing rapidly. The AC-130's night vision and infrared sensors gave it a significant advantage in darkness, but daylight would level the playing field considerably. More importantly, daylight would allow enemy observers to coordinate more effective surface-to-air missile attacks. The SA-14s were dangerous enough at night, but in daylight they became exponentially more lethal. Ghost Rider Neptune 6, we can see landing zone Viper. Estimate 15 minutes to reach extraction point. 15 minutes that might as well have been 15 hours. The enemy forces were closing from multiple directions, and Castellanos could see at least 3 SA-14 teams positioning themselves for shots at the AC-130. The aircraft's fuel state was also becoming critical. They had enough gas to remain on station for another 30 minutes maximum, assuming they didn't have to conduct any more high-energy evasive maneuvers. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider. Be advised we are approaching bingo fuel. How much longer until extraction birds arrive? There was a long pause before Valdez responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of resignation that Castellanos hadn't heard since the beginning of the mission. Ghost Rider Neptune 6. Extraction birds are still 40 minutes out, weather delay at their launch point. 40 minutes was longer than the AC-130 could remain on station, which meant the SEAL team would be on their own for the final phase of their extraction. After 6 hours of continuous air support, they would face the most dangerous part of their mission without cover. Unless someone came up with another plan. Castellanos looked at her fuel gauge, then at her ammunition counter, then at the tactical display showing enemy forces converging on landing zone Viper. The mathematics were brutal, but they weren't impossible. "Crew, this is Pilot," she announced over the intercom. "I'm going to propose something that violates about 6 different flight safety regulations. We can stay on station longer if we reduce our altitude and throttle back to minimum fuel consumption. That puts us in range of small arms fire, but it gives Neptune 6 the cover they need until extraction arrives." Morrison looked at her with something approaching admiration. "That's completely insane. How low are you talking about?" 4,000 feet, maybe less. 4,000 feet put the AC-130 well within range of heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. It was suicidally low for a large, slow-moving aircraft over hostile territory. It was also exactly what the SEALs needed. "I'm in," Morrison said without hesitation. Behind them, Rodriguez and Kim voiced their agreement. The AC-130 began its descent toward landing zone Viper, dropping from 8,000 feet to 4,000 in a controlled descent that made every crew member acutely aware of just how vulnerable they had become. But the lower altitude also gave them capabilities they hadn't possessed before. At 4,000 feet, the aircraft's weapons were devastatingly accurate, capable of placing rounds within meters of designated targets. Neptune 6, Ghost Rider. We're going low and slow. Anything that moves in your direction is going to have a very bad day. The final approach to landing zone Viper became a running firefight, with enemy forces attempting to intercept the SEAL team, while the AC-130 engaged any target that presented itself. The aircraft's ammunition load dropped steadily, but its psychological effect on the enemy was enormous. No one wanted to fight an AC-130 gunship at close range. The psychological impact of sustained, accurate fire from an orbiting aircraft was devastating to enemy morale. At 6:15 hours, the SEAL team reached landing zone Viper and established a defensive perimeter. The landing zone was clear of immediate threats, but enemy forces were positioned on the surrounding high ground, waiting for the helicopters that would provide an irresistible target. Ghost Rider Neptune 6, we're in position at the LZ. Thanks for getting us here. But Castellanos knew the mission wasn't over. The extraction helicopters would be flying into a potential ambush, and the AC-130's ammunition load was down to 10%. They had maybe one more engagement left before they were Winchester on everything. Neptune 6 Ghost Rider. Extraction birds inbound ETA 20 minutes. Will stay until they arrive. 20 minutes at minimum fuel consumption. Flying at 4,000 feet over hostile territory with almost no ammunition remaining. It was the kind of tactical situation that made career military officers wake up in cold sweats. But it was also exactly why the AC-130 existed, to provide close air support when no other option was available, regardless of the risk. The enemy's final assault began at 6:25 hours, 10 minutes before the extraction helicopters were scheduled to arrive. It was a coordinated attack from 3 directions, designed to overrun the SEAL team's position before air support could intervene. But the enemy had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed the AC-130 was out of ammunition. Technical Sergeant Kim had been conserving the 105 howitzer shells for exactly this moment. He had 3 rounds remaining, and he intended to make each one count. Multiple targets, massed formation, grid coordinates. Kim's voice was steady as he prepared the aircraft's most powerful weapon for its final shots of the mission. The first 105 shell landed in the center of the largest enemy group, killing or wounding 15 fighters and breaking up their assault formation. The second shell targeted a heavy weapons team that was attempting to provide covering fire for the attack. Kim saved the third shell for the SA-14 team that had been tracking the AC-130 throughout the descent to low altitude. The missile crew never got their shot. Winchester on 105, Kim announced. 25 and 40 have less than 2% remaining. But it was enough. The enemy assault had been broken, and the survivors were withdrawing to defensive positions that would allow them to survive but not to threaten the landing zone. At 6:35 hours, 2 U-60 Black Hawk helicopters appeared over the eastern ridge, flying fast and low toward landing zone Viper. The extraction was finally happening. Neptune 6 Rescue 7-1, we have eyes on your position. Pop smoke for identification. Purple smoke bloomed from the SEAL team's defensive position, confirming their location and signaling that the landing zone was secure. The helicopters flared to a hover, their door gunners scanning for threats while the SEAL team boarded quickly and efficiently. Ghost Rider Neptune 6, Valdez transmitted one final time. We're lifting off, thanks for keeping us alive. The helicopters departed rapidly, climbing toward the safety of higher altitude and friendly airspace. Within minutes, they were beyond the range of enemy small arms fire, carrying 12 Americans who had spent the night certain they were going to die. But the AC-130's mission wasn't complete. With the SEALs safely extracted, Castellanos turned her attention to the larger tactical picture. The enemy forces that had been defeated tonight would regroup and return, potentially threatening other coalition operations in the region. All stations, Ghost Rider, she transmitted on the command frequency. Request immediate intelligence update on enemy forces in Sector 77. We have identified significant enemy capability and recommend follow-on operations. The response came from the Tactical Operations Center, the same headquarters that had initially denied close air support clearance. Ghost Rider, RTB immediately. You are ordered to return to base for debriefing. Return to base, the polite military way of saying you're in trouble. Castellanos knew that what she had done tonight would have consequences. Disobeying direct orders, violating safety protocols, and conducting unauthorized combat operations were career-ending offenses under normal circumstances. But these hadn't been normal circumstances. "Roger, returning to base," she transmitted, beginning the AC-130's climb back to cruising altitude for the flight home. As the aircraft gained altitude and turned toward friendly airspace, Castellanos allowed herself a moment to reflect on the night's events. 12 Americans were alive who should have been dead. An enemy force had been defeated and scattered. The mission had been accomplished. But the real test was still ahead. In a few hours, she would be sitting across from senior officers who would want to know why she had chosen to disobey direct orders and risk a $100 million aircraft along with its crew. The answer was simple, even if the consequences weren't. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. The flight back to base was conducted in relative silence, each crew member lost in their own thoughts about what they had experienced and what might happen next. They had participated in a mission that would be analyzed and debated for years to come, a textbook example of close air support conducted under impossible conditions. But more than that, they had demonstrated something that couldn't be taught in flight school or learned from tactical manuals. The warrior ethos that placed mission accomplishment and the welfare of fellow service members above personal safety or career advancement. As landing zone Viper disappeared behind them and the first rays of dawn illuminated the Afghan mountains, Castellanos realized that, regardless of the consequences she was about to face, she would make the same decision again. Some things were more important than following orders. The AC-130U touched down at Bagram Airfield at 8:47 hours, its crew tired but professionally satisfied with the night's work. As the engine spooled down and the aircraft settled onto its parking spot, Castellanos could see the vehicles waiting for them, military police and senior officers who would escort them to what promised to be a very uncomfortable debriefing. But before she could worry about courts-martial and career consequences, Technical Sergeant Kim's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ma'am, I've got a message coming in from Neptune 6. Valdez's voice, transmitted from the hospital where the SEAL team was being debriefed and treated for minor injuries, came through crystal clear. "Ghost Rider, Neptune 6. 12 Americans went home alive tonight because of you. Whatever happens next, remember that." Castellanos smiled as she began the aircraft shutdown checklist. Sometimes that was enough. The debriefing lasted 18 hours and involved officers ranging from squadron commanders to Pentagon officials participating via secure video link. Every aspect of the mission was dissected, analyzed, and scrutinized by people who understood tactics, but had never faced the impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. Captain Lydia Castellanos sat at the conference table, her flight suit replaced by dress blues, and answered questions about fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, and risk assessment protocols. She explained her decision-making process with the same calm professionalism she had demonstrated in the cockpit, never apologizing for her actions, but acknowledging the seriousness of disobeying direct orders. The questions were predictable. Why did she choose to violate the established safety perimeter? How did she justify risking a crew of 12 to save a team of 12? What gave her the authority to countermand orders from senior headquarters? Her answers were equally straightforward. The safety perimeter was established to protect aircraft from a theoretical threat that hadn't materialized. The risk to her crew was significant but manageable, while the risk to the SEAL team was